My parents left me at a train station as a joke. Let's see how she finds her way home. I never went back. The years later, they found me. This morning. 9 missed calls. Before we continue, I would like to ask you to subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications and leave a comment about where you are watching from. Let's go back to where it all began. I never thought betrayal could cut so deep, especially not from the very people who were supposed to protect me. My name is Audrey, and at 16, I learned that family isn't always about love. Sometimes, it's about the cruelest of lessons life can possibly teach you. The summer day was merciless, a scorching tableau of abandonment that would forever be etched in my memory. The isolated train station stretched before me like a metaphor for my entire existence. Vast, empty, and utterly unforgiving. My parents stood nearby, their expressions a calculated mix of detachment and what they claimed was tough love. But I knew better. This was something far more insidious. "We're teaching you independence," my father said, his voice as dry as the heat surrounding us. The words hung in the air, a pathetic attempt to disguise their true intentions. My mother remained, silent, her eyes avoiding direct contact, a skill she had perfected over years of emotional manipulation. They had planned this. Every single detail was meticulously orchestrated to break me down, to prove some twisted point about survival and resilience. I clutched the small backpack they had handed me, its lightness a cruel joke against the weight of the moment. Inside, I had little more than a water bottle, a granola bar, and 20, a pittance that spoke volumes about their expectations. They weren't preparing me for a journey, they were setting me up for failure. The train station was a landscape of abandonment. Concrete stretched in every direction, punctuated by rusted benches and faded signage. Occasional winds carried dust and fragments of forgotten stories, much like the pieces of my own fractured childhood. I realized in that moment that this wasn't just about finding my way home. This was a calculated assault on my sense of self-worth. My mind raced with a tornado of emotions. Fear intertwined with anger. Confusion danced with a newfound determination. I thought about the previous lessons they had subjected me to. Times when they had locked me out during storms, made me walk miles in pouring rain, stripped away every layer of comfort and security. This was their version of parenting, a brutal training ground where love was conditional and survival was the only currency that mattered. The sun beat down mercilessly, a relentless witness to my abandonment. Sweat traced paths down my forehead. My hands trembled slightly, but something deep inside refused to break. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Each breath became an act of defiance, each moment of uncertainty a testament to my resilience. I watched as they prepared to leave, my father's hand on the car door, my mother's gaze fixed somewhere in the distance. No final words of comfort, no reassuring touch, no hint of the maternal warmth one might expect. Just cold, calculated abandonment dressed up as a life lesson. In that moment, something fundamental shifted within me. I understood that survival wasn't just about finding my way home. It was about preserving my spirit, protecting my sense of self against those who would seek to diminish me. My parents thought they were teaching me independence, but what they were really doing was teaching me the most important lesson of all. True strength comes from within. The sound of their car engine fading into the distance was like a starting gun. I was alone, completely and utterly alone. But I wasn't helpless. I was Audrey, a name that would soon become synonymous with resilience, with survival, with the extraordinary ability to transform pain into power. Little did I know this moment of abandonment was just the beginning of a journey that would reshape my entire existence. The train station wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The train station wasn't an isolated incident. It was just another chapter in a long, painful story of systematic emotional destruction. Looking back, I realized my parents had been perfecting their craft of psychological manipulation long before that scorching summer day. Each lesson was carefully designed to chip away at my self-worth, to make me feel smaller, more insignificant. The storm incident remains vivid in my memory, a night that transformed my understanding of parental love forever. I was 14 then, naive enough to believe families were supposed to protect each other. It was a violent thunderstorm, the kind that makes even the bravest souls tremble. Lightning cracked the sky like a whip. Thunder roared with a fury that seemed to match the chaos brewing inside our home. I had come home drenched from a school event, hoping for warmth, for comfort. Instead, my parents saw an opportunity for another one of their character-building exercises. "You're getting too soft," my father had said, his voice cutting through the storm's noise. "Real survivors adapt. Real survivors don't cry. Real survivors figure things out." The words were a knife, sharp and precise, designed to wound. When they locked me out, it wasn't just about the physical act of leaving me in the storm. It was about breaking my spirit, piece by agonizing piece. I remember the cold first, a bone-deep chill that seemed to seep into my very soul. The rain wasn't just water. It was a relentless punishment. Each droplet felt like a judgment, each gust of wind a reminder of my supposed weakness. My clothes became a second skin of misery, clinging to me with a desperation that mirrored my own emotional state. The walk home became a metaphorical journey of survival. Miles stretched before me like an endless test, each step a declaration of my refusal to be defeated. I wasn't just walking through a storm, I was walking through the landscape of my own resilience. My parents watched from the window. I knew they were watching. This wasn't about teaching me a lesson. This was about proving a point. Psychological abuse rarely announces itself with loud declarations. It creeps in softly, disguised as tough love, as preparation for a harsh world. My parents were masters of this subtle art. They didn't just hurt me physically. They systematically dismantled my sense of self-worth, making me believe that my value was conditional, that love was something to be earned through endless trials. These lessons weren't random. They were calculated, methodical attempts to control, to break, to rebuild me in their image of the perfect, unbreakable child. But what they didn't understand was that every challenge they threw my way was actually making me stronger. Each moment of abandonment was teaching me something they never intended: how to truly survive, how to rely on myself. The storm walk wasn't just about physical endurance. It was about emotional survival. It was about understanding that the greatest strength comes from within, from a place they could never touch. With each step, with each moment of discomfort, I was building a fortress of resilience that would become my greatest weapon. As I finally reached home that night, soaked to the bone but unbroken, I saw something in my parents' eyes that would stay with me forever, a mixture of frustration and something that almost resembled respect. They hadn't broken me. If anything, they had created something far more dangerous, a survivor who refused to be defined by their limitations. Little did they know, each lesson was adding another layer to my armor. Each moment of calculated cruelty was preparing me for a future they could never imagine, a future where I would not just survive, but thrive. The storm that night was nothing compared to the internal hurricane I was becoming. Powerful, unstoppable, unbreakable. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. For me, that salvation had a name: Aunt Ellen. She was my lifeline, the single thread of compassion in a world that had taught me nothing but cruelty. My summer job at the local bookstore had been more than just a way to earn money. It was my first taste of true independence. I had saved every single penny, tucking away $120 that would become my ticket to freedom. Most teenagers might have spent that money on clothes or concerts. But for me, it was a map to survival. The day I decided to leave wasn't dramatic. There were no tearful goodbyes, no grand speeches. It was a quiet decision, born from years of systematic abuse and a burning desire to reclaim my life. Aunt Ellen had been my secret confidant, the only person who truly saw me, not as a project, to be fixed, but as a human being worthy of love and respect. When I called her, my voice was steady. Years of emotional conditioning had taught me to control my emotions, to never show weakness. "I need help," I said simply. Those 5 words were the most honest thing I had spoken in years. Aunt Ellen didn't hesitate. "Pack what you can," she responded, her voice a mixture of concern and determination. "I'll be there." Packing my life into a single bag was easier than I thought. When you've been systematically stripped of your sense of self, material possessions become secondary. I took only the essentials: a few changes of clothes, my most treasured book, a photograph of myself before my parents' lessons began. Each item was a testament to my resilience, a small rebellion against the years of emotional warfare. The journey to Aunt Ellen's was like crossing a border between 2 different worlds. Each mile put distance between me and the toxic environment that had defined my existence. I watched the landscape change, familiar streets giving way to new, horizons, my past becoming smaller in the rearview mirror. Aunt Ellen's home was nothing like the cold, calculated environment I had grown up in. It was warm, filled with soft colors, and the kind of genuine love I had never experienced before. Her embrace wasn't a calculated move or a lesson in disguise. It was pure, unconditional acceptance. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. "You're not broken," she told me, her hands gently holding mine. "You're a survivor." Those words were like water to a plant that had been starving for years. I realized that my parents' lessons had been designed to make me believe I was fundamentally flawed, but Aunt Ellen saw the truth. I was strong. I was resilient. I was whole. The process of healing wasn't instant. Some days were harder than others. The mental scars ran deep, invisible wounds that would take years to fully understand. But with Aunt Ellen's support, I began to rebuild myself. We talked. We cried. We processed the years of emotional abuse. She helped me understand that what I had experienced was not normal, not acceptable, and most importantly, not my fault. My summer job savings became my first step towards true independence. Aunt Ellen helped me enroll in community college classes, supporting my desire to learn, to grow, to become something more than the broken child my parents had tried to create. Each class was a victory, each academic achievement a middle finger to the system that had tried to break me. I started to dream again, not the small, survival-based dreams my parents had forced upon me, but big, expansive dreams of a life filled with purpose and passion. I wanted to create something meaningful, to prove that survival was more than just existing. It was about thriving, about transforming pain into power. The girl who had been abandoned at that train station was slowly disappearing, replaced by a woman who was writing her own story. Aunt Ellen wasn't just my guardian. She was my first, true example of what unconditional love could look like. She showed me that families aren't defined by blood, but by the depth of care and support. As the months passed, I realized that my escape was more than a physical journey. It was a complete transformation of my understanding of self-worth, of love, of what it means to truly live. The $120 I had saved wasn't just money. It was my passport to freedom, my investment in a future where I would no longer be defined by my past. 20 years can transform a broken child into an unstoppable force. Austin's skyline became my canvas, Haven Developments my masterpiece, a testament to the resilience born from years of survival. The journey wasn't linear. Each step was a calculated move, every professional decision a deliberate act of reclaiming my narrative. My business wasn't just about constructing buildings. It was about building something far more profound, a life of purpose, of meaning, of absolute independence. The early years were grueling. While my peers were climbing corporate ladders with family connections and generational wealth, I was constructing my empire from scratch. Every project was a battle, every contract a personal victory. I didn't just want success. I was determined to redefine what success could look like for someone who started with nothing. Real estate in Austin was competitive, but I had something most developers didn't: an unbreakable spirit forged in the eye. Fires of childhood trauma. Where others saw challenges, I saw opportunities. My lessons from my parents had inadvertently prepared me for a world of cutthroat business negotiations. Emotional manipulation? I had a PhD in recognizing those tactics. Survival under pressure? That was my default state. Haven Developments quickly became known for more than just innovative urban design. We were different. I implemented programs that supported young professionals from challenging backgrounds, creating internship opportunities for those who, like me, needed a chance to prove themselves. Each employee wasn't just a worker. They were part of a mission to transform potential into power. My design philosophy was a direct reflection of my journey. Buildings weren't just structures. They were statements of resilience. We specialized in adaptive reuse projects, transforming abandoned spaces into vibrant community centers, tech hubs, and affordable housing. Just like I had transformed my own life, we transformed forgotten spaces into something magnificent. The irony wasn't lost on me. The parents who had tried to break me had instead created an architect of success. Every blueprint, every completed project was a silent testament to their failure. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving in a way they could never have imagined. Financial success was just one aspect of my transformation. I invested heavily in mental health resources for my employees, creating a company culture that valued human potential over pure productivity. Therapy sessions, mental health days, support programs. These weren't just benefits. They were a revolution in how businesses could care for their people. My reputation grew beyond just being a successful developer. I became a speaker, a mentor, sharing my story of transformation. Young entrepreneurs would approach me, eyes wide with hope, seeking guidance. In their struggles, I saw reflections of my own journey, and I was determined to be the support system I had never had. Aunt Ellen watched my journey with a mixture of pride and gentle concern. She understood better than anyone the depth of my transformation. Our weekly dinners became a ritual of reflection, of healing, of celebrating the incredible distance I had traveled from that scared 16-year-old at the train station. Success, I learned, wasn't about proving something to my parents or to the world. It was about proving something to myself, that I was worthy, that I was capable, that my value was not determined by anyone's cruel lessons, but by my own determination. As Haven Developments expanded, winning awards and transforming Austin's urban landscape, I realized that my greatest project was myself. Each building was a metaphor, constructed with precision, resilience, and an unwavering belief in transformation. I had taken the ruins of my childhood and built something extraordinary. The girl who was once abandoned now stood as a beacon of hope, not just a survivor, but a creator of opportunities, an architect of dreams. My parents' final lesson had backfired spectacularly. They thought they were breaking me, but instead, they had created something far more powerful than they could have ever imagined. Success has a way of attracting the most unexpected visitors. 20 years after my escape, the ghosts of my past came knocking, not with remorse but with calculated precision. The first message arrived on a crisp autumn morning, a social media notification that made my blood run cold. My parents, the architects of my childhood trauma, had resurfaced with a carefully crafted narrative of reconciliation. But I knew better. This wasn't about healing. This was about exploitation. Their approach was masterful in its manipulation. They didn't start with direct demands. Instead, they crafted a public narrative of a long-lost family desperate to reconnect. Social media became their weapon. Carefully curated posts that painted me as the ungrateful daughter, them as the misunderstood parents. Each post was a calculated move, designed to generate sympathy and pressure me into engagement. I watched their performance with a detachment that surprised even myself. Years of survival had taught me to recognize emotional manipulation, like a seasoned detective reads a suspect's body language. Their posts were filled with strategic vulnerability, mentions of health issues, financial struggles, subtle hints of desperation. The financial angle was their primary weapon. My success with Haven Developments had become public knowledge. Profiles in business magazines, interviews about my journey from struggle to success, all of it became ammunition for their reconnection strategy. They weren't interested in me as a daughter. I was a potential solution to their financial problems. Private messages followed the public performance, each one a delicate dance of guilt and emotional manipulation. "We always loved you," they would write, conveniently forgetting years of systematic abuse. "We were just trying to make you strong," became their recurring justification, as if abandonment could be rebranded as a parenting strategy. Their tactics evolved. When social media guilt-tripping failed, they began spreading subtle rumors, whispers about my past, carefully crafted half-truths that suggested I was an ungrateful child who had abandoned her struggling parents. They knew the power of reputation in the business world, and they were ready to weaponize it. Aunt Ellen was my rock during this period. "They're playing their old game," she would remind me, her voice a steady anchor in the storm of manipulation. We analyzed their messages together, breaking down each word, each subtle implication. What they saw as a strategic attack, we saw as a desperate last attempt to control me. The financial pressure became more direct. Subtle mentions of medical bills, of potential legal actions. They were testing my boundaries, probing for weakness. But the girl they had tried to break years ago was gone. In her place stood a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up, who understood the value of boundaries. I realized their reconnection wasn't about love. It was about resources. I was no longer the vulnerable child they could manipulate. I was a successful businesswoman with the resources to solve their problems. Each message was a carefully constructed trap designed to guilt me into financial support. But I had learned from the best, from their own masterclass in emotional manipulation. I would not be their solution. I would not be their victim again. The final blow came unexpectedly. A direct message suggesting that if I didn't help them, they would share the truth about my past. It was their ultimate weapon, threat and manipulation wrapped in a single calculated message. But threats only work when you have something to fear. I had spent years building myself back together. Their words were nothing more than echoes of a past I had already conquered. Haven Developments wasn't just a company. It was my fortress, my declaration of survival, my proof that I could create something beautiful from the ruins of my childhood. As I drafted my response, a clear, firm boundary that would become my final word, I felt something remarkable. Not anger, not pain, but complete, absolute freedom. They say war has many fronts, but I never expected my battlefield to be both legal and deeply personal. When manipulation failed, my parents escalated, transforming their approach from subtle guilt trips to an all-out assault on my professional and personal life. The lawsuit arrived like a calculated missile, wrapped in legal language but dripping with desperation. Filial responsibility laws, an archaic legal mechanism that suddenly became their weapon of choice. They weren't just asking for help anymore. They were demanding it through the cold, impersonal channels of the judicial system. I remember opening the legal documents, my hands steady despite the storm brewing inside me. Years of survival had taught me to remain calm in the face of emotional hurricanes. Each page was a testament to their strategic cruelty, a legal document designed to paint me as an ungrateful, heartless daughter, who abandoned her aging parents. The allegations were meticulously crafted. Detailed medical bills itemized with precision, financial statements suggesting imminent destitution, a narrative of parental suffering that conveniently ignored years of emotional abuse. They had found a legal loophole, a way to weaponize familial obligation into a financial stranglehold. My legal team became my lifeline. Recruited through Aunt Ellen's connections, these weren't just attorneys, they were strategic warriors who understood the nuanced battlefield of family law. Long nights were spent poring over documents, dissecting every claim, building a defense that was more than just a legal strategy. It was a comprehensive exposé of my parents' manipulative tactics. The financial demands were staggering, hundreds of thousands in supposed medical expenses, claims of ongoing care needs, backdated support requests that stretched back years. It was a fishing expedition disguised as a legal claim, a desperate attempt to tap into the success I had, built from the ground up. But they had underestimated my resilience. Each legal document became an opportunity, not a threat. My team began gathering evidence, a comprehensive timeline of the abuse I had endured, documented psychological evaluations, expert testimonies about the long-term impacts of childhood trauma. We weren't just defending against a lawsuit. We were exposing a pattern of systematic emotional manipulation. The public warfare was equally calculated. My parents began a systematic campaign to tarnish my reputation. Social media became their primary weapon. Carefully crafted posts that suggested I was a heartless business mogul who had forgotten her roots. They shared selective memories, half-truths, that painted me as the villain of our family narrative. Haven Developments was more than just a company to me. It was my life's work, a testament to survival and resilience. Their attempts to sabotage my professional reputation were attacks on everything I had built. They reached out to business contacts, dropped hints about my unstable past, tried to create doubt about my leadership. The most brazen move came when they showed up at my workplace. A public confrontation designed to create maximum drama. My father dramatically presenting medical bills, my mother performing a scene of maternal desperation in the lobby of Haven Developments. It was a performance worthy of a Hollywood drama, except the stakes were real and the pain was genuine. But they had miscalculated. The team at Haven Developments knew my story. They had been part of my journey, witnesses to my transformation. Instead of creating doubt, their public display backfired spectacularly. My employees rallied around me, their support a silent but powerful counterattack. Social media became my platform of truth. With the guidance of my legal team and Aunt Ellen, I began to share my story, not as a victim, but as a survivor. Each post was carefully crafted, each statement a precise articulation of my journey. I didn't just defend myself, I reclaimed my narrative. The legal battle became a broader conversation about familial abuse, about the complex dynamics of survival. Media outlets picked up the story, not as a sensational piece, but as a nuanced exploration of resilience. Interviews, podcasts, feature articles, my story began to resonate with thousands who had experienced similar betrayals. Psychological experts were brought in to testify about the long-term impacts of childhood emotional abuse. My parents' tactics were systematically dismantled, not just in court, but in the court of public opinion. Their attempt to paint themselves as victims crumbled under the weight of documented evidence. As the legal battle dragged on, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about a lawsuit or financial demands. This was a final attempt to control me, to break the spirit they had tried to crush years ago. But the girl they once knew was gone, replaced by a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up, stronger and more resilient than they could have ever imagined. The lawsuit would become a turning point, not just in my personal story, but in how society understood familial abuse and survival. I was no longer just fighting a legal battle. I was fighting for every child who had ever been told their worth was conditional, for every survivor who had been silenced. Reclaiming my narrative wasn't just about winning a legal battle or silencing my parents. It was about transforming pain into purpose, turning my personal struggle into a powerful message of hope and resilience. The moment I decided to speak my truth publicly was carefully calculated. No more hiding, no more silence. My story would be told on my terms, with the full weight of my experiences laid bare for the world to understand. Social media became my weapon, my platform, my megaphone of truth. I began with a series of carefully crafted posts that documented my journey. Each word was a deliberate strike against the narrative my parents had tried to construct. I shared the details of my childhood, the abandonments, the emotional abuse, the systematic destruction of my self-worth. But I didn't present myself as a victim. I was a survivor, a creator, a force of transformation. The response was unprecedented. My posts went viral, not because of sensationalism, but because of their raw, unfiltered honesty. Thousands of messages began pouring in, from survivors of similar experiences, from people who saw their own stories reflected in mine, from professionals who understood the depth of childhood trauma. Haven Developments became more than just a business. It transformed into a platform for change. I established a foundation dedicated to supporting young professionals who had experienced childhood trauma, creating scholarship programs, mental health resources, and mentorship opportunities. Each initiative was a direct response to the pain I had experienced, a way to turn my personal struggle into a broader mission of healing and empowerment. My parents' attempts to control the narrative crumbled. Where they had once tried to manipulate public perception, I now controlled the conversation. Media outlets that had once been skeptical now sought my perspective. I became a sought-after speaker, sharing my story at conferences, universities, and corporate events. The legal battle continued, but it was no longer about winning or losing. It was about exposure, about bringing light to the hidden dynamics of familial abuse. My legal team had become more than just attorneys. They were partners in a larger mission of justice and healing. Aunt Ellen watched my transformation with a mixture of pride and protective concern. Our weekly dinners became strategy sessions, moments of reflection on the incredible journey of healing and empowerment. She had been my first true support system, the person who had believed in me when no one else did. I launched a podcast, Rebuilding, Stories of Survival and Success, where I interviewed other survivors who had transformed their pain into purpose. Each episode was a testament to human resilience, a celebration of the strength that comes from overcoming seemingly insurmountable challenges. The public narrative shifted dramatically. My parents' attempts to portray themselves as victims became increasingly desperate. Their social media attacks lost their power, drowned out by the overwhelming support and understanding I had cultivated. But this wasn't just about personal vindication. I understood that my story was bigger than myself. It was about creating a conversation around familial abuse, about challenging the societal norms that often silence survivors. My foundation began working with lawmakers, pushing for stronger protections for children and young adults experiencing emotional abuse. Corporate partnerships followed. Companies began implementing more robust support systems for employees who had experienced childhood trauma. My keynote speeches weren't just motivational talks. They were calls to action, challenging organizations to look beyond traditional support structures. The financial lawsuit became almost irrelevant. My success, my resilience, my ability to transform pain into purpose, these were my true victory. I had created something my parents could never touch, a life of meaning, of impact, of absolute independence. Mental health professionals began referencing my story in academic research. I collaborated with psychologists, contributing to a deeper understanding of childhood emotional abuse and its long-term impacts. What was once my personal trauma became a catalyst for broader societal understanding. My relationship with Aunt Ellen deepened. She wasn't just my guardian anymore. She was my partner in this mission of healing and empowerment. Together, we continued to build resources, to create support systems for those who had experienced similar struggles. As I stood on stages, shared my story, and watched the ripple effect of my truth, I realized something profound. My parents' attempts to break me had created something far more powerful than they could have ever imagined. I wasn't just a survivor. I was a movement, a voice for those who had been silenced, a beacon of hope for those still finding their way. The girl, abandoned at the train station, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had not just survived, but had transformed her pain into a powerful force of change. Peace isn't something you find, it's something you create. After years of battle, of transformation, of relentless resilience, I discovered that true freedom wasn't about defeating my parents. It was about liberating myself from the last invisible chains of their influence. The final chapter of my journey wasn't dramatic. There were no grand confrontations, no explosive revelations. Instead, it was a quiet, profound moment of personal liberation. I chose peace, not as a surrender, but as my ultimate act of strength. Blocking my parents wasn't just a digital action. It was a symbolic closing of a chapter that had defined too much of my life. Each social media platform, each communication channel became a boundary I carefully constructed. No more access, no more opportunities for manipulation, no more space for their toxicity to penetrate my carefully rebuilt world. Reconnecting with Aunt Ellen became my true homecoming. She wasn't just family. She was the embodiment of unconditional love I had always craved. Our relationship transcended the traditional boundaries of aunt and niece. She was my mentor, my confidant, the person who had seen me at my most vulnerable and helped me become my strongest self. I began to explore the depths of healing that went beyond professional success. Therapy became a crucial part of my journey, not as a means of fixing something broken, but as a process of understanding, of growth, of continuous self-discovery. Each session peeled back layers of trauma, helping me understand the intricate ways childhood abuse had shaped my perceptions. The foundation I had created became my greatest legacy. It wasn't just about providing resources. It was about creating a community of survivors who understood that their worth was not determined by their past, but by their capacity to heal and grow. Scholarship programs, mental health resources, mentorship initiatives, each became a testament to the power of transformation. My professional success with Haven Developments took on a deeper meaning. Each building we constructed wasn't just a physical structure, it was a metaphor for resilience. We specialized in adaptive reuse projects, transforming abandoned spaces into vibrant community centers. Just as I had rebuilt myself, we were rebuilding urban landscapes. Relationships took on a new dimension. I learned to create boundaries, to understand the difference between vulnerability and weakness. Love became a choice, not an obligation. The romantic relationships I pursued were founded on mutual respect, understanding, and genuine connection. Nothing like the conditional love I had experienced in my childhood. Aunt Ellen's health began to decline, and our relationship entered a new phase. Where once she had been my protector, now I became her caregiver. Those moments were sacred, filled with conversations that went beyond words, a deep understanding of love that transcended biological connections. I began writing, not just for public consumption, but as a form of personal healing. My memoir became a beacon for others, a raw, unfiltered account of survival, of transformation. Publishers were initially hesitant, but the authenticity of my story cut through their reservations. The book became a bestseller, not because of sensationalism, but because of its profound message of hope. Public speaking engagements evolved. I was no longer just sharing my story, I was creating a movement. Universities, corporate conferences, international platforms became stages where I discussed the complexities of childhood trauma, of healing, of redefining success on one's own terms. The legal battles with my parents faded into insignificance. Their attempts to control me became distant memories, like old photographs losing their color. I had created a life so full, so meaningful, that their existence became a mere footnote in my narrative. My foundation expanded internationally. We began working with global organizations, creating support networks for survivors of childhood abuse. What had started as a personal mission became a global movement of healing and empowerment. Birthdays and holidays, once sources of anxiety, became moments of personal celebration. I created my own traditions, my own understanding of family. Aunt Ellen, my closest friends, the community I had built. They became my true family. Forgiveness wasn't about reconciliation. It was about releasing the emotional burden, about understanding that my parents' actions were a reflection of their own brokenness, not my worth. I chose to move forward, not with anger, but with a profound sense of compassion, for myself, and surprisingly for them. As I looked back on the journey, from that isolated train station to the life I had created, I realized that survival was just the beginning. True victory was in the life I had built, the people I had helped, the transformations I had sparked. The girl they tried to break had become something far more powerful than they could have ever imagined. I was not just a survivor. I was a creator of hope, an architect of resilience, a beacon of transformation. And in that realization, I found my ultimate freedom.